Okay, so you're in a long distance relationship, and now the big question you're asking is, how do we decide who moves? And I can totally understand all the frustrations and emotions that go into asking that question, because I personally just went through all of it myself. I just got married in December, and leading up to that, I would say that trying to figure out how we were gonna merge our lives was probably one of the biggest sources of conflict that we faced. But good news, if you're in that season, we did figure it out and we now live together and everything is great. And also, little spoiler alert, if you don't already know, I am the one who ended up moving. So I am going to talk to you about how we figured all that out and navigated the ins and outs of that. But first of all, if you don't already know me, my name is Brianna. I run a page on Instagram where I give singleness and dating advice. And I also am the author of the book called Single and Standing, which basically just navigates you through my journey of being the single Christian girl who wanted a marriage so badly, but just felt like she was perpetually single, to eventually meeting my husband. So I share all of that in the book if you want to know more about my story. And I also dive into some of the struggles that I faced in singleness, how I learned to thrive, the way that I changed my mindsets, and what I felt was most impactful. And I even share now what advice I would give looking back. So I feel as though this is just such a helpful resource, which is why I created it. So I'm going to link it below, as well as my Instagram page. I would love to have you follow along on Instagram. Check out the book. Let me know what you think. So how do we decide who moves in a long distance relationship? And obviously, as you know, this is not a cut and dry answer, right? Each person's scenario is going to bring different things to the table, right? Each person's going to have certain things they value, certain life circumstances that make you feel as though there's a certain outcome that you need to have, or even just one that you heavily want. And that's okay. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is that you should do. However, I'm going to share the process that my husband and I went through, some of the things that we did, the steps that we took to come up with a solution. And I think that this is really going to be helpful for you as well, to just kind of look at the framework of how you navigate this problem-solving situation. So obviously, first things first, you have to be having conversations about it. You probably already know that much. The part that I think is really, really imperative is having these conversations well. And I think that's something that's incredibly hard to know how to do. When we go into these conversations, we have so many emotions tied to a certain outcome. We are connected with certain things that we feel like we have to have. So these conversations come with already heightened emotions, and they're just very challenging to try to figure out and to navigate. So what I would say is, in order to have effective communication, there's a couple things you have to keep in mind. First of all, I'm going to throw this out there. If I were you, I would go right away and purchase the book called Crucial Conversations. I'm in no way sponsored by them or anything. I just simply felt like that was a very valuable tool for us. It's great for your romantic relationship and just lives in general. It's really just teaching you how to have those conversations that are important, that are life-changing, that really just have a lot of different factors involved. So I'll link that book too, just so that way you have that as a resource, because that really helped us. But okay, so some things. So you sit down to have a conversation and you're feeling all the emotions and all the stress. Definitely, this was not one of my favorite things to navigate, but honestly, I feel like overall going through it made us stronger as a couple. We discovered that we could work together to come up with a conclusion as a couple. So I believe that that's what you're going to find as you navigate this too. So you sit down to have a conversation. One of the main things I would say is it's very beneficial if both you and your partner can get all of your thoughts and feelings out into the open. No judgment, no interruption. So the best way to do this, and the way that we did it, is that we would take turns. So basically, I would let him talk openly and get everything out onto the table of the things that he valued, the things that were important to him, where he wanted to live, why he wanted to live there, what he did not want to lose. And that sounds easy at first, right? Like, let him talk about what he wants and you talk about what you want. But the part that's the hardest is what comes up when the other person is talking. So as we're talking, he's saying things, so I'm from Syracuse, and that is where I wanted to live. That's where my family lived. That's where I had this amazing job. So I'm bent on living in Syracuse, and he's saying things like, well, I definitely don't see a future in Syracuse. I can't see raising a family there, and I just feel like there's nothing to do there. And I can feel inside me all of this anxiety rising up. And maybe you've had some of these conversations already, and you can just feel as that other person talks and what they're saying is not in line with what you actually want, all these feelings start to rise up. It might be anxiety or panic or disagreement. Like, I can't tell you how many times he would be talking and I would feel it rise up in me, just that feeling to want to interject. Like, he could say, there's nothing to do in Syracuse. And I would want to be like, but that's not even true. Like, first of all, what do you need to do? Like, you're not a partier. You don't have all these crazy hobbies. Like, how entertained do you have to be? And I'd have all these arguments that I'd want to fight him with. Inside, thankfully, I kept them inside, but it's so easy to let them come out. But you're not trying to go to battle with your partner. Usually, him saying one thing and you saying another thing and going back and forth is never a productive mode of communication. If you've tried communicating with anybody like that in your life before, fighting back and forth doesn't work. So if you step back and you give them the stage, right? Like, if they have the mic and you're sitting in the audience, they say the words, you don't. So your job right now is to listen, and you'll get your turn after. So to listen and actively listen. So you're not listening to keep the mental checklist of all the arguments you're going to give him later, and you're not listening to think of all the reasons that what he's saying is wrong. You're truly listening to understand. So the point in this is that you want to know, what does your partner value? What is it that they want to hold on to? Because ultimately, the conclusion that you come to and the decision that you make, what you truly want for you and your partner is for both of you to feel fulfilled and to feel at peace. So you want to listen to the things that are valuable to them. This is going to come in handy later when you have to start working towards a compromise together. So let them talk. It's okay to sit back and rest. Nothing in your life is going to get taken away from you or stolen in that moment if you don't speak up right away. So this is your turn to sit there. Then when it's your turn to speak, again, your goal is to get all of your feelings on the table. So for me, I tend to be more of a peacemaker. I don't really have the easiest time sometimes articulating what it is that I feel. So sentences like, I want this, I don't want this, for me, those tend to be very challenging sometimes to even put into words. Other people have a hard time not just word vomiting and just going crazy and putting that other person down and expressing every single, this is what you said and this is why it's unnecessary. So you really want the goal of this not to be attacking your partner, but to be stepping out and actually clearly and assertively and kindly expressing what it is that you want. Okay. So once both partners have successfully done that, and this is something that maybe takes practice, and trust me, takes many conversations. One conversation is not going to be enough to seal the deal. This is going to be a conversation that happens over and over again. Each time, maybe a little bit of a solution comes out, maybe more of an understanding comes out. Maybe you feel like you took 3 steps backward. It's a process. So this is going to be a process of coming to a conclusion, definitely not a one-time conversation. But each conversation that you can have well, the better it is. Okay, so you're actively listening. You're maybe even asking some questions to further understand what they feel. So like, for example, my husband saying, well, there's nothing to do there, and me being like, that's ridiculous. Yes, there is. To maybe ask him the question of, what kinds of things would you like to be able to do in the place that you live? That's a question that's going to give me a little bit more as to what he's actually feeling. So for me, when it actually came down to it, what he was actually wanting behind those statements is he is a passionate entrepreneur. He wants to build his own business, and part of that is networking, interacting with other people. New York City feels like the networking hub, and that's where he lives. And he was looking at going to Syracuse, where I lived, and it didn't have that same networking opportunity for him. So understanding that gave us a little something to work with, a little something that I could then sit there and realize, okay, so what this is about for him is he wants networking opportunities. How can we provide those? What are some ways that we can bring those into this scenario? Can we do that where I live? Do we need to move somewhere that's busier? So the goal is to really get your creative wheels spinning to try to come up with a solution, because the main thing is that in order for this to be successful, the goal isn't to win, right? So I feel like this is something very, very important for you to keep in mind. When you're communicating with your partner, the temptation is that you want to win. So either you win and he loses, or whether you're a guy or a girl, one partner wins, the other partner loses. And that's not how it should actually work. And this took me a little bit to reframe my brain. It shouldn't be one person against the other. It should be, how do we win as a couple? So winning as a couple, yes, is going to look like each person maybe losing some things, each person compromising, each person sacrificing to ultimately make the decision that's best for the couple to win. So an example of what this compromise and sacrifice kind of scenario looks like. So for us, I was in a position that I felt like I needed to stay at the job that I was in. And the reason for that is that I'm a radiation therapist, so that means that I treat cancer patients. This is my full-time career. And I had gotten into a position where I was the manager of a facility. So when I got this role, I had so many people tell me, they're like, oh my gosh, like you accepting this job was the best career move you could have made. Like you've got it in now, girl. Like I remember somebody being like, this is your big girl job. Like this is the job where people sit there and they climb the ladder all these years. You made it. So I'm sitting there in this job knowing that finding these openings is rare. I'm believing God gave me this job opportunity, which I still believe he did. And also my work environment was just absolutely fantastic. I was close friends with the girls I worked with. It was a great schedule, so many things that I would look at. And for me, this was my thing that I was like, I can't let this go. Like that would make no sense. And I would envision for you probably have something similar to that. Something that's like, wait, no, I can't let go of this. I can't see, it would make no sense for me to release this. So that was my thing. But in the process of us talking, and I'm talking multiple discussions, and even reaching out to some trusted friends and being like, what's your input? I remember one woman sharing with me basically this idea of, what are your long-term goals as a couple, right? So she was saying, you have this thriving career, and ultimately, if you were to move to be with him, you would have to take a step down in your career. But vice versa, if he were to move, he would be taking a step backwards in his career, which that was something he had expressed to me too. He's in sales, and sales is very much based on relationships and clients. And so for him to relocate to a brand new region would be building those relationships from scratch and over a much broader area. So the region that I lived in, he would have to travel a lot more as opposed to making sales. He would have to rebuild connections with people that he would make sales with. So for him, that felt like a step back in career. So when you're sitting there going, well, wait, one of us is going to have to lose out here. In this particular scenario, we had to ask ourselves, what's best overall for the couple? So our long-term goals, and this may be totally different for you. This is us specific. As a couple, I would love for him to be the provider, and he's on board with that. And for ultimately, once I have kids, that I can focus on raising the kids at home. So if that's our ultimate goal, and this was the part that our friend had posed to us, she was like, if that's your ultimate goal, it might seem silly for you right now to take a step back career-wise, but if you taking a step back means pushing him further in his career, and you ultimately want him to be the breadwinner and the provider, then maybe for your long-term goals, you taking a step back might actually make sense. And for us, that was something that resonated with me. So I give this example not to say that, and whatever your situation is, go for the man's career, not the woman's. That's not what I'm saying. You guys know what it is that you value. My point is being able to start thinking with your brain like that, saying, what is best for us as a couple? Whether it's job-wise or whatever the other arguments are that you come up with, it's trying to think outside of yourselves and think together. Because ultimately, if I was thinking of me as an individual, taking a step back in my career made no sense. But for us as a couple to do something that would get us closer to our goal of him being provider and me being to, the supporting income, that did make sense. Also, when it came down to it and we decided that I was going to be the one to move towards him, that wasn't the end of the story either, right? So I was gonna move down to New York City, and for me, that brought up so many concerns and tensions, because I was like, okay, fine, I'm gonna live down there, but what does that mean my quality of life looks like now? Does that mean living in Manhattan and having to take the subway into work and walk through a chaotic city and, safety and all of the things I was concerned about? I didn't want to have to park on the streets and do public transportation. To me, that seemed foreign and uncomfortable and just not the kind of life I wanted to live. So this is where, again, some of that compromise came in, and also that thinking of a couple, because he would be fine with transportation in and throughout the city. But now we also had to think of me and my experience coming from where I came from. So this is where he raised the suggestion of, well, what if we don't live in the city? What if we live in the suburbs outside the city and I commute? So on both ends, we were compromising. And it's not about having even compromise and being like, who's sacrificing more? It's about really finding something that's working for both of you. So what was working for us was, yes, me going to live where he lived, but also him moving a little bit too, to live in a place that was more conducive to me, where I was able to find a job that had an easier commute, where there were parking lots and things that I cared about. So the reason I give these examples is not to tell you exactly the things that you have to think of, but instead it's to give you a demonstration of what the creativity looks like, of being like, how do we think outside the box? What the compromise looks like, of saying, you know what, here's how I can let something go for you, and there's some things you can let go for me, and how do we both step outside our comfort zones and consider each other and consider the unit. So those were the things that we factored in. So the final process that I'll share that we went through was, we did a time of prayer and fasting, and we did it together but separate, if that makes sense. So we took about 3 days and we did fasting, whatever fasting looked like for each of us, really devoted that time to worship, to prayer, to reading our Bibles. And for us, we even took a fast from each other. Like, for these 3 days, we're not even talking to each other. Like, let's just seek God on this. So there's no cut and dry way, again, that you have to do this, but I would really recommend taking that time to really spend time seeking God in it, because it does multiple things. One, you might feel you have so much more clarity after, and I wouldn't even say that that was the experience for us, that we had like an aha moment during this time. I think the biggest things that it did for us was it gave us more of an open mindset, which is really, really important to have if you're trying to work with another person. Because in the process of praying, we're praying things like, God, it's not what I want, it's not what they want, it's what you want. And it's really just acknowledging that overall, God has a whole picture. God actually knows what would be best for you. So even if you think in your head that a certain thing makes sense, that doesn't mean that that's ultimately the design that God has. And if there's one thing that I've figured out in life, is that you want to be on the path that God has for you and the place that He wants you to be, because that's where the center of His blessings are. So when you're spending time seeking His will, it really helps you to open yourself up to be like, you know what, this is not about all of my wants and needs. Like, what do you have for me, God? Because I know that's what's best, and I know that's where the blessings are. So I think for us, having me pray like that and get to that mindset, and him pray and get to that mindset, that really helped us when we came together again to have this open mentality of like, you know what? We're both okay no matter how this turns out. And it took us a very long time to get there, a very long time of each of us holding on for dear life to what it was we wanted. But I think once we did get to the place where we were open to like, you know what, however God wants this to be, we're okay with. That's when we were able to start applying for jobs in each other's cities. We both kind of actively looked at opportunities in each other's cities because we figured, you know what, let's just start opening the doors for God to move. Let's just look at the different options and hopefully He'll lead through that method. So that was a process we went through. The prayer also, I feel like, just gave you this sense of peace because it was the reminder that no matter what, like, you're going to be okay. Especially if God has blessed you with this person and it's a healthy relationship and it's ultimately, you know, marriage is something that you want. These things that you feel like you're holding on to in the grand scheme of things just are not that important. So to be able to let go, let God take control, navigate this as a unit, trying to figure out what God wants, ultimately you will come up with something that makes sense. I remember my friend saying to me, she was like, you know, right now it's like, you know, when you throw a pebble into the water and the water's just all ripply, like you can't see clearly because of all the disruption. Once you let the ripples settle, the answer is clear. And I feel like that is truly the experience that we had once I got out of my own way of being like, but the subway and the parallel parking, and what about the people who are gonna walk by me on the streets that aren't safe? And once I let all of those what ifs go, and I was like, okay, but what about not living near my family? And I was just like, God, where do you want me to be? When the chaos settled, the answer of what made sense for us as a couple really truly did become clear. So I would challenge you to take some time and pray about it, and then take some time working with your partner, really just trying to compromise with them, get creative, think outside the box, actually think openly about what some of the solutions are, because this isn't the first scenario that'll come up, or it might be the first, but it's definitely not the last scenario that'll come up of things that you have to work together on. And I think part of the reason for us that we established, you know, early on, we were like, oh, you know, if we don't know exactly where to live and we don't agree on this, is that a deal breaker? Like, that was one of the questions we were asking. And when it came down to it, the core of the relationship was so good. It was healthy. It was everything we prayed for. The location we lived in was the big issue. And I just remember thinking that, you know, something like location and having to live in a certain place was certainly not worth stopping me from the joy of being with someone like him, the joy of the health and the beauty of our relationship. Because ultimately, yes, this decision did require a lot of sacrifices and compromise, meaning that there were things that I wanted that I had to let go of, things he wanted that he had to let go of, decisions we made that maybe one of us didn't really prefer. But that's also the definition of a thriving relationship and a thriving marriage, is being able to work together that way. So I don't think we want to shy away from the opportunity to do that. In fact, I think that this is a fantastic, maybe first opportunity, or one of the first opportunities to really practice laying down our wants and working together as a unit. So you can absolutely do this. I did this. If you have any questions along the way, I would love to help you out. Drop them in the comments below, or go to my Instagram page and send me a DM. I would love to interact with you through that. You can do this. The plan that's up ahead for you is so exciting. It's just a matter of you finding out what that plan is. So I'm rooting for you, and I pray that God blesses you and helps you to navigate exactly where you're supposed to be. Bye-bye.